When Mara Whitcomb lifted her bidder card for the drowned quarry, the whole auction room forgot how to breathe. Then they laughed. $1,400 for 68 feet of black water, rusted cable, and a fence line so rotten even teenagers stopped sneaking through it. Graham Vance laughed the loudest. He owned the road crews, the asphalt plant, the gravel yards, and enough county officials to make people lower their voices when they said his name. To him, the old Harrow pit was not land. It was a warning label. 18 months later, every truck on the new mountain highway was waiting at Mara's locked gate, because the thing everyone called a flooded hole was the only thing that could save Graham Vance's $58 million contract. The county tax auction was being held in the basement hearing room of the Holloway County Courthouse, a room with peeling acoustic tiles and a coffee urn that had been burning since dawn. Contractors filled the folding chairs in work boots and sports coats. Land flippers leaned against the back wall, whispering parcel numbers like gamblers talking about horses. Mara sat near the aisle with a canvas work bag on her lap. At 35, she looked older when she was tired, and she was always tired. She handled overnight inventory at a highway supply warehouse, then cleaned cabins on weekends near Black Laurel Lake. Her mother was gone. Her father, Elias Whitcomb, had died after 2 brutal years of treatments that left behind a stack of bills with red letters at the top. The only thing Mara still had from him, besides his old survey compass, was a metal recipe box packed with index cards, not recipes, rock notes. Elias had spent his life as a state materials geologist, the kind of man who could rub dust between 2 fingers and tell you whether a road would survive winter. He never got rich from knowing the ground, but he had known the ground better than anyone in Holloway County. Parcel 31C, the auction clerk called. Former Harrow Stone Company property, 37 acres, abandoned quarry, standing water, unknown debris, no county liability. Minimum bid equals delinquent taxes. $1,400. A low chuckle rolled through the room before the clerk even finished. Everyone knew Harrow Pit. It sat beyond a sagging gate off Coal Bank Road, with vines growing through the chain link and a warning sign bleached almost white by the sun. In 1991, a blast opened a spring. The quarry filled faster than pumps could pull it down, and the company walked away. Since then, it had collected rainwater, trash, rumors, and mosquitoes. The clerk looked over the room as if he already knew the answer. Any bid at $1,400? Mara raised her card. The laughter died so sharply that the fluorescent hum became audible. Graham Vance turned in the front row. He had silver hair, a tanned face, and a navy jacket with no dust on it, which told everyone exactly what kind of contractor he was. He looked at Mara's raised card, then at her warehouse shoes. "Mara," he called, smiling like he was saving her from herself. "That is not a starter farm. That is a liability with frogs." A few men laughed. She kept the card up. "You'll spend more fencing it than it's worth," he said, "and if a kid falls in, you'll be paying lawyers until you're old." Mara looked at the clerk, not at him. $1,400 from bidder 17, the clerk said, surprised enough to sit straighter. "Any advance?" Nobody moved. Graham leaned back, shaking his head. "Going once, going twice, sold." Mara's hand trembled only after she lowered the card. Outside, in the courthouse hallway, Graham caught up with her beside the bulletin board of sheriff's notices. "Listen," he said, his voice dropping into that soft tone powerful men use when they want cruelty to sound like advice. "I know Elias left you in a bind, but pride is expensive. That pit will eat you alive." Mara slid the auction receipt into her work bag. "Maybe." Graham handed her a business card thick enough to feel like plastic. Vance Rods and Materials was embossed in silver. "When you get tired of pretending, call my office. We'll haul some clean fill in there and cap it. I may even buy it off you for what you paid, just to keep the county from inheriting another mess." Mara looked at the card, then tucked it into the side pocket of her bag. She did not throw it away. She wanted to keep a record of the first price. That afternoon, she drove to Coalbank Road in a 15-year-old hatchback with one cracked tail light. The gate was chained but loose. She slipped through sideways and walked past sumac, beer cans, and old conveyor parts sinking into weeds. The quarry opened without warning. A sheer bowl of stone dropped below her, filled with still water the color of burnt tea. The far wall rose in fractured bands, pale gray at the top and darker where the water touched it. It smelled like wet leaves, rust, and cold rock. To anyone else, it looked dead. Mara set her work bag on a flat stone and took out the metal recipe box. Elias had asked for it 3 nights before he died. His hands had been thin, his voice had been ruined by medication. But when he said the words Harrow Pit, his eyes had cleared. They quit too early, he had whispered. Not limestone, not where it mattered. Page H31, red tab. At the time, Mara thought grief had tangled him in an old job. After the funeral, she found the card. Harrow Stone, East Wall. Do not diskette core data. Under it, in her father's cramped handwriting, were numbers she did not fully understand then. Magnesium content, absorption rate, abrasion loss, Polish value, freeze-thaw durability. A sketch showed the flooded pit and a narrow, darker band beneath the old waterline. At the bottom, Elias had written one sentence in block letters: high-friction road stone if ever exposed. Mara stood above the black water now and looked at the far wall. The vein was still underwater. So she started lowering the water, not dramatically, not quickly, not the way a company would do it. She bought one used trash pump from a farm auction, then another from a man who sold equipment out of a barn. She patched hose with clamps and tape. She filed drainage paperwork herself, because every gallon had to go into the permitted culvert and not into the creek. She learned which diesel cans leaked and which pump had to be kicked twice before it caught. Every Saturday, headlights swept across the quarry before sunrise. By spring, Holloway County had a nickname for the place: Mara's bathtub. At the warehouse, drivers joked about bringing soap. At the hardware counter, men asked if she had found any goldfish yet. Someone taped a cartoon frog to her locker. She peeled it off without comment and kept the tape because she needed it for hose labels. The bills did not wait for her plan to work. The county taxed 37 acres whether the acres made money or not. A pump cracked in a freeze and cost almost half a paycheck. Her father's medical creditors called from numbers she did not recognize. More than once, Mara ate peanut butter from the jar in the cab of her car while watching brown water spit from a hose into the ditch. But the quarry was changing. By the 9th month, a ledge appeared on the east wall, dark and hard, different from the chalky stone above it. By the 12th, the water had dropped enough for her to stand on a shelf that had not seen air in 3 decades. She took chips from the exposed band with a hand sledge. The rock rang, not crumbled, rang. That sound made her cry harder than the auction room had. She called Jonah Bell. Jonah had once run a state materials lab before arthritis bent his fingers, and retirement turned him into a man who repaired radios and avoided people. He had worked under Elias Whitcomb for 7 years. When Mara knocked on his door with a coffee can full of stone chips, he opened it 3 inches and told her no before she finished speaking. "I'm not certifying a ghost," he said. "I'm not asking you to certify it," Mara said. "I'm asking you to tell me if my father was wrong." That stopped him. 2 days later, Jonah stood at the edge of Harrow Pit with a cane in one hand and Elias's old card in the other. For a long time he said nothing. Then he said, "Your father never wrote in block letters unless he wanted someone to survive the mistake." They rented a portable core drill for 1 weekend. The drill screamed against the rock. Mara held the water line steady. Jonah marked depths with a grease pencil. They pulled out 6 cylinders from the dark seam, each one heavy, tight-grained, and almost blue when wet. The lab results came back 3 weeks later. Jonah did not call. He drove to the warehouse at 6:10 in the morning and waited by the employee entrance until Mara's shift ended. He was holding a sealed envelope so tightly his knuckles looked white. She opened it under the loading dock light. Show abrasion loss, 16.9%. Polished stone value, 66. Magnesium carbonate content, exceptionally high. Freeze-thaw durability, excellent. Recommended classification, high friction surface aggregate. Jonah exhaled like he had been holding the breath since 1991. Mara, he said, your father did not find a quarry. He tapped the report. He found a key. The problem was that keys do not matter until someone needs the locked door opened. Mara mailed packets to paving companies in 3 states. Most never answered. One receptionist told her politely that her employer did not buy from private landowners with homemade maps. A regional aggregate broker offered to take the property off her hands for $20,000 and handle the complicated part. She hung up. Then Holloway County changed overnight. The governor announced the Black Laurel Connector, a federally funded mountain highway meant to pull heavy freight off the old 2-lane pass where trucks jackknifed every winter. The first phase would cut through ridge country less than 12 miles from Harrow Pit. The town went wild. Survey trucks appeared at dawn. Motel rooms filled with engineers. Diners added staff. Landowners who could barely give away hillside acreage suddenly called it commercial frontage, and Graham Vance moved faster than everyone. He had the crushers. He had the asphalt plant. He had the political handshakes. He had 2 limestone quarries and a bid so low the out-of-state firms could not touch it. Vance Roads and Materials won the first phase paving and base contract for $58 million. At the celebration, he rented the banquet hall at the golf club and stood beneath a banner that said, "Building the Future of Holloway County." He shook hands, smiled for pictures, and told a reporter that local stone built local roads best. 3 weeks later, the state materials inspector shut him down before his first asphalt batch. Her name was Celeste Arno, and she had the kind of calm that made angry men louder. She met Graham at his main quarry, walked to the stockpiles, looked at the test sheets and closed the folder. "This will pass for base," she said, "not for the friction course." Graham laughed once, because he thought she was joking. "We have paved half this region with this stone, and half this region is not a federally funded mountain connector with a 7% grade, heavy truck traffic and freeze-thaw exposure," Celeste said. "The top lift requires approved high-friction aggregate. Your limestone polishes too quickly. My stone meets state road spec, not this spec." She turned the folder around. "Your polish value is 43. The project requires 60 or better." The number seemed to remove the air from the quarry. By sunset, Graham's procurement team had the answer he did not want. The nearest approved active source with enough high-friction stone was hundreds of miles away. Trucking it would destroy the margin. Rail would miss the schedule. Missing the schedule would trigger penalties. Defaulting would put his bonding capacity at risk, and without bonding, Vance Roads and Materials was not an empire. It was equipment with debt attached. At 9:40 that night, his operations manager stepped into the conference room carrying a thin report. "There is one local source," she said. Graham looked up. "Where?" She did not answer quickly enough. "Where?" he snapped. "Harrow Pit." For a moment nobody moved. Then Graham said, "That property is underwater." "Not anymore." "Who owns it?" His operations manager swallowed. "Mara Whitcomb." The next afternoon, Mara was changing a pump belt when Graham's SUV stopped outside the quarry gate. He got out wearing polished shoes that immediately sank in wet clay. Mara did not walk down to meet him. She stayed by the pump, wiping grease from her hands. "Busy," Graham called. "Very." He smiled as if they were old friends. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I misjudged this place." "No," Mara said. "You judged it exactly the way you judge things. Fast, loud, and from a distance." His smile tightened. "I'm here with a serious offer." He lifted a leather folder. $200,000 for the property. Clean sale. You walk away with more money than that pit could ever give you, and my company assumes the liability. Mara looked past him at the exposed east wall. The dark seam cut through the quarry like a locked drawer finally opened. 200,000, she repeated. That is generous. For 37 acres of approved high-friction aggregate with a polish value of 66, Graham's face changed so fast it almost looked like a shadow crossed it. Mara stepped closer. I know why you're here. Celeste Arnault rejected your surface aggregate. Your limestone came in at 43. The connector needs 60 or better. Your nearest outside source is too far to haul without bleeding the contract dry. Graham stared at her. Then he looked at the pump lines, the drained ledges, the numbered flags Jonah had placed along the wall. The woman he had mocked in the courthouse had not been guessing. She had been waiting for the door to lock. How much? He said. The land is not for sale. His nostrils flared. You do not have a crusher. You do not have loaders. You do not have blasting permits. You do not have haul trucks. You have a wet hole and a lab report. I have the stone, Mara said. You have the machines. She reached into a waterproof document tube and pulled out a contract. Graham looked at it without taking it. What is that? An extraction agreement. Now she handed it to him. Vance Roads and Materials make quarry, crush, and haul from Harrow Pit for the Black Laurel connector. I keep ownership of the land and source rights. Jonah Bell supervises material separation and testing. You restore drainage and safety berms at your cost, and you pay me $12.50 per ton removed. Graham barked a laugh. There was no humor in it. You think roadstone is jewelry? No, Mara said. I think schedule failure is expensive. His eyes sharpened. The first phase required nearly 2.5 million tons across base blending, asphalt aggregate, shoulders, and reserves. Not all of it needed the premium seam, but enough did. Enough to make Mara's number dangerous. That rate guts my profit, he said. It saves your company. You do not know my company. I know bonded contractors cannot default on a federal highway job and pretend nothing happened. I know your penalty clock starts if you miss supply certification. I know the banks like your equipment more than they like you. Graham stepped so close, she could smell the mint on his breath. You are playing above your weight. Mara did not step back. No, she said. For once the weight is under my land. He left without signing. By morning, the counterattack had started. A county commissioner requested an emergency review of truck traffic on Coal Bank Road. A wetlands complaint appeared, though the wetland was a flooded industrial pit with rusted rebar in it. An anonymous safety petition claimed Mara's drainage pumps threatened downstream farms. A local bank suddenly reclassified her small equipment loan as risky and demanded additional collateral. Graham did not need to say his name for her to hear it in every phone call. For 36 hours, Mara nearly broke. Not because she thought he was right. Because power has a sound, and it sounds like doors closing one after another. She sat in her car outside Jonah's house after midnight with the engine off and the lab report in her lap. I can't fight all of them, she said. Jonah stared through the windshield at the rain. No, he said. So stop fighting county men with county weapons. The next morning, Mara and Jonah drove to the state field office with 3 core samples, Elias's cards, the lab report, and every drainage permit she had filed. Celeste Arnault met them in a conference room that smelled of toner and old carpet. Mara expected indifference. Celeste read for 21 minutes without speaking. Then she asked, "How soon can this source produce?" Mara answered honestly. With Vance's equipment within weeks. Celeste looked at Jonah. Can you maintain separation between the high-friction seam and the common stone? Jonah nodded. With a state inspector watching, yes. 2 days later, Harrow Pit was placed on the project's approved emergency material source list, pending supervised extraction. The state issued a haul access protection order tied to the federal funding schedule. The county could still inspect safety. It could not use zoning theater to strangle the only local compliant source after the project had already validated it. Graham learned this in the commissioner's office. The commissioner, who had always laughed at Graham's jokes, now looked at him like a man standing too close to lightning. "I can't block her," he said. "You mean you won't?" "I mean the state copied Federal Highway Council on the order. Harrow Pit has protected material access for the connector. If we obstruct it without cause, the county becomes the delay." Graham's phone vibrated. "His operations manager," he answered. Her voice was tight enough to cut glass. "State wants proof of supply within 48 hours. If we don't submit a compliant source agreement, they issue notice to cure. After that, penalties, then bond review." Graham closed his eyes. The room was silent except for the buzz of the fluorescent light. The flooded hole had become a gate, and Mara Whitcomb was holding it shut. The signing happened in a law office 3 counties over, because Mara did not trust any conference room in Holloway. Graham arrived with 2 attorneys and a face carved out of stone. Mara arrived with Jonah, Celeste's approval letter, and a lawyer who had taken her case after seeing the lab values. The final agreement was not as high as Mara's first demand. It was stronger. Vance Roads and Materials would pay a tiered extraction royalty averaging just over $12 per ton on qualifying material, plus access fees, site restoration bonds, and testing costs. The first guaranteed minimum payment was due before the first production blast. $31 million over the Phase 1 supply window if the tonnage projections held. Graham signed last. His pen paused above the signature line. Mara watched his hand. At the courthouse, he had offered to buy her mistake back for $1,400. At the quarry, he had offered $200,000 to erase her. Now he was buying permission to survive. He signed. The next month, Harrow Pit woke up. Pumps roared where frogs once scattered. Survey stakes marked benches along the walls. Excavators crawled down newly cut ramps. Crushers arrived in pieces on low-boy trailers, their steel jaws assembled under work lights. The first controlled blast rolled through the valley like distant thunder, and the dark seam Elias had marked 30 years earlier split open cleanly. Every load was tested. Jonah sat in a trailer with a heater at his feet and a clipboard across his knees, cranky enough to frighten young engineers and proud enough to check every sample twice. Mara wore a hard hat with Whitcomb Materials printed on the side in black letters. The first time she saw it, she had to turn away before the crew noticed her face. Graham's trucks came through her gate all day, not as owners, as customers. The Black Laurel Connector opened its first mountain stretch the following winter. On the morning of the ribbon cutting, frost silvered the guardrails and freight trucks lined up beyond the barricades. Reporters filmed the governor. County officials smiled in overcoats. Graham Vance stood near the back, thinner now, quieter, his empire intact but no longer untouchable. Mara stood on the shoulder beside Jonah. Below them, the new road curved through the ridge, black and clean, its surface built to hold tires in rain, snow, and speed. Drivers would never know what made the pavement grip. They would not know about the auction room, the frog jokes, the cracked pumps, the lab envelope under the loading dock light, or the old geologist recipe box. But Mara knew. Jonah nudged her with his cane. Elias would have checked the asphalt mix before he cried, he said. Mara laughed, and this time it did not hurt. He would have said the binder content looked suspicious. He would have been right. A tractor trailer rolled onto the new pavement, engine growling, tires humming over the surface that had almost bankrupted the man who mocked her and finally freed the woman he underestimated. Mara touched the old survey compass in her coat pocket. The town had thought she bought a hole. Her father had left her a map, and when Holloway County's future needed a foundation, it had to pass through the gate she refused to sell.